Hello, and welcome to History at Bedtime. Babylon was not the first city ever built. That distinction belongs more safely to the older urban worlds of southern Mesopotamia, especially Uruk, where writing, administration, monumental architecture, specialized labor, and large-scale urban life appeared together earlier than they did in Babylon. But Babylon became something that even older cities did not become in quite the same way. Its greatness is not diminished by caution. If anything, caution makes it stronger, because the real Babylon is more interesting than the exaggerated one. Older than legend, smaller than fantasy, larger than any single symbol, and still difficult to hold in the mind at once. It became the city that later ages remembered when they wanted to imagine the height of human ambition. It became the city of blue gates and golden gods, of law carved into black stone, of astronomers watching the night sky for centuries, of scribes pressing wedge-shaped signs into clay, of kings who claimed to rule by divine command, of exiles who transformed the religious history of the world, and of ruins that became more powerful in memory than many living cities ever were in reality. Its name crossed languages and religions. In Hebrew scripture, Babylon became a place of exile, pride, judgment, and longing. In Greek writing, it became a city of wonder, walls, gardens, astrologers, and ancient wisdom. In Christian apocalyptic imagination, it became a symbol of corrupt imperial power. In later political language, it became a metaphor for oppression, luxury, foreign domination, spiritual confusion, and the great machine of worldly authority. And behind all of those meanings, there was also a real city. A city of mud, brick, and bitumen, of canals and date palms, of temple courtyards and private houses, of markets where wool, barley, sesame oil, copper, silver, and slaves changed hands. A city where children learned signs on clay tablets, where merchants sealed contracts with cylinder seals, where priests served Marduk in the Sagila temple, where processions passed through the Ishtar Gate, and where the Euphrates flowed close enough to shape the life of every person who lived there. To understand Babylon, we have to hold two things at the same time. We have to understand the symbol, the Babylon of the Bible, of Herodotus, of Alexander, of Revelation, of archaeology, of modern politics, of imagination. But we also have to understand the real place, the city in the alluvial plain of southern Iraq, built from river mud, sustained by irrigation, vulnerable to conquest, rich in archives, and brilliant in the arts of administration, mathematics, literature, and celestial observation. Babylon was never only a city. It was an argument about what a city could be. A city could gather grain, labor, gods, laws, soldiers, scholars, merchants, and memory into one place. A city could make the invisible visible, divine order in a temple, royal justice on a stele, time itself in a table of lunar observations. A city could promise that the world had structure, that the heavens could be measured, that contracts could be enforced, that gods could be served, that kings could hold together the fragile human world between the floodplain and the desert. And a city could also terrify, because Babylon also meant forced labor, conquest, deportation, hierarchy, royal violence, and the constant pressure of power concentrated into stone, brick, ritual, and law. The same city that gave later generations images of wisdom also gave them images of captivity. The same city that preserved the motions of the stars also destroyed Jerusalem. The same king who built the processional way and the Ishtar Gate also carried entire populations away from their homes. So this is not a simple story of the first city, or the greatest city, or the wicked city, or the wise city. It is the story of a city that became large enough, old enough, rich enough, and symbolically powerful enough to contain all of those meanings at once. To understand Babylon is to understand one of the deep beginnings of the world we still inhabit. The world of writing, law, calculation, empire, sacred architecture, exile, bureaucracy, scholarship, and memory. That is the right way to approach Babylon, not as a single answer, but as a layered city. The archaeological city, the royal city, the biblical city, the scholarly city, and the symbolic city all occupy the same name. A good history has to let them stand together without flattening them into one easy meaning. Before we follow kings and conquerors, it is worth pausing for a moment inside the city itself, because Babylon only becomes interesting when it stops being a name on a map and becomes a place where people woke, worked, worried, prayed, bargained, and slept. In the morning, before the heat settled over the plain, the city would have stirred along the canals. Donkeys moved with loads of reeds, bricks, dates, and jars of oil. Boatmen pushed cargo along the water routes that made the flat country livable. A woman might grind grain in the courtyard of a house built around a small open space. A child might copy signs on a tablet of damp clay, pressing the reed stylus again and again until the wedge marks became regular. A merchant might check a sealed contract before sending wool or barley onward. A priest might pass through a temple court with water, incense, and offerings prepared for the god. None of these people were thinking about being part of the inheritance of civilization. They were simply living in a system so organized, so recorded, so administered, and so ritually charged that almost every action left a mark somewhere, in clay, in accounts, in memory, in obligation. That is what gives Babylon its unusual power. The city is not only monumental, it is intimate. A blue gate is impressive, but a school tablet with a student's uneven signs is more human. A royal inscription is impressive, but a complaint about a failed delivery of goods makes the ancient city suddenly close. Babylon gives us both scales at once: gods and invoices, ziggurats and family houses, cosmic order and ordinary anxiety. It allows the mind to move from the height of a temple tower to the surface of a tablet small enough to fit in one hand. From the king, who claims to protect widows and orphans, to the widow or orphan whose name may have appeared in a contract, a lawsuit, or a ration list. That movement between the enormous and the personal is where the ancient city becomes alive. A city like Babylon was never experienced all at once by anyone who lived there. A priest knew one Babylon, built from ritual sequence, temple property, and divine obligation. A merchant knew another, built from weights, debts, risk, and sealed agreements. A laborer knew the city through mud brick, heat, water, and authority. A deported Judean knew it through shock, foreign language, imperial power, and the ache of memory. A palace official knew it through archives and orders. An astronomer knew it through the patient regularity of the moon, planets, and stars. These Babylons overlapped, but they were not identical. The city was powerful because it could contain them all. The story of Babylon does not begin with Babylon. It begins with a city called Uruk, further south in the Mesopotamian plain, which was among the first truly large urban settlements in human history and which reached its peak in the 4th millennium BCE, between 5,000 and 6,000 years ago. Uruk, in this early period, may have had a population of 50,000 people or more, which would have made it the largest human settlement anywhere in the world at that time. And it was in Uruk that several of the features that we associate with urban civilization first appeared together: monumental architecture, specialized labor, long-distance trade, administrative record-keeping, and eventually the writing that made sophisticated administration possible. The writing that emerged in Uruk around 3200 BCE was not, initially, what we think of when we think of writing. It was accounting. It was lists. small clay tablets impressed with symbols that recorded quantities of barley and numbers of sheep and measures of oil, kept by the temple administrators who managed the resources of the great temples that dominated the city. The symbols were initially pictographic, a picture of a jar of oil, a number of strokes to indicate quantity, and gradually became more abstract and more standardized as the need for efficient record-keeping outpaced the capacity of purely pictographic representation. Over several centuries, through a process of gradual simplification and abstraction driven by the practical needs of accounting, the pictographic script became the wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform, pressed into clay with a stylus made from a cut reed, capable of representing not only objects and quantities but sounds and syllables, and eventually the full range of spoken language. This development, writing as an administrative tool that gradually became a literary medium, is one of the most significant in human history, and southern Mesopotamia is one of the places where we can watch it happening earliest and most clearly. The civilization that grew up around this writing system, that developed it and elaborated it, and eventually used it to record epic poetry and astronomical observations and legal codes and personal letters and business contracts and astronomical predictions and mathematical problems. This civilization is what Babylon eventually came to represent at its highest development. After Hammurabi's death, Babylon's first great empire did not remain stable forever. This is another pattern that will repeat throughout the city's history. Babylon could rise to extraordinary prominence, but Mesopotamia was too competitive, too exposed, and too dependent on shifting coalitions for supremacy to remain permanently secure. Hammurabi's successors inherited a larger kingdom than Babylon had possessed before him, but they did not inherit his military and diplomatic genius. Control over the southern cities weakened. Economic pressures increased. Rival dynasties challenged Babylonian authority. Then, around the 16th century BCE, the Hittites from Anatolia struck deep into Mesopotamia and sacked Babylon. The raid was dramatic, but the Hittites did not remain to rule the city. Instead, the political space that followed was filled by the Kassites, a people whose origins lay in the Zagros region and who would rule Babylonia for centuries. The Kassite period is less famous than Hammurabi's age and less visually spectacular than Nebuchadnezzar's, but it matters deeply because it shows Babylon becoming more than a dynasty. Hammurabi's empire could fall. A foreign dynasty could rule. The city could suffer defeat. Yet Babylonian culture continued. Cuneiform scholarship continued. Temples continued. The Akkadian language, in its Babylonian form, remained central. Marduk's prestige continued to grow. The idea of Babylonia as a cultural world survived political interruption. This is one of the great strengths of Mesopotamian civilization. It was not dependent on a single ethnic group or a single ruling family. Sumerian had been replaced as a spoken language, but survived in learned tradition. Akkadian became the language of administration, diplomacy, scholarship, and empire. Amorites, Kassites, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Persians, Greeks, and others could rule or influence the region, but the clay tablet culture absorbed them into patterns older than any one conqueror. The Kassite kings adopted Babylonian titles, supported Babylonian temples, and inserted themselves into the local religious framework. They did not erase Babylon. They became part of it. In this sense, Babylonian civilization was both fragile and resilient. Its cities could be burned. Its traditions could continue. Its kings could be replaced. Its scribes could keep copying. Its gods could be carried away and later restored. The idea of divine order could survive the interruption. The image of a god statue being taken from a city by a conqueror is difficult for a modern reader to feel in full force. In Mesopotamia, the cult statue was not an emblem in the weak modern sense. It was the earthly presence of the god. To lose the statue of Marduk was to experience not only political defeat, but cosmic dislocation. A city without its god was not merely occupied, it was spiritually wounded. When the statue returned, the return was not just a restoration of property, it was the return of order. Babylonian history is full of these rhythms: conquest, humiliation, restoration, rebuilding, ritual renewal. The city became powerful not because nothing ever broke, but because so much was repeatedly restored. The city of Babylon itself appears in the historical record for the first time in the 3rd millennium BCE as a relatively minor settlement in the northern part of the Mesopotamian plain. For much of the 3rd millennium, the center of Mesopotamian political and cultural life was further south, in the cities of Sumer, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Nippur, Eridu, where the Sumerian-speaking population had developed the earliest complex civilization and where the cultural innovations of urban life had first appeared. Babylon was a peripheral place in this early period, its name appearing in a few texts, but not yet the center of anything that the wider world would recognize as important. That began to change in the early 2nd millennium BCE, when a series of military and political developments shifted the center of Mesopotamian power northward. The city of Ur, which had been the dominant power in the south in the 3rd dynasty of Ur period, roughly 2112 to 2004 BCE, fell to a combination of internal weaknesses and external pressure from the Amorites, a Semitic-speaking people from the Western Desert who had been infiltrating Mesopotamian society as workers and soldiers, and who, by the early 2nd millennium, were beginning to establish their own dynasties in the major cities of the region. Babylon came to prominence under an Amorite dynasty, the first dynasty of Babylon, that established itself in the city sometime around 1894 BCE. For the first several rulers of this dynasty, Babylon was one of several competing city-states in the central Mesopotamian plain, expanding its territory gradually through a combination of military force and political maneuvering in the complex environment of intercity competition that characterized Mesopotamia in this period. The 6th king of this dynasty was a man named Hammurabi, and what Hammurabi did would make Babylon the most important city in the ancient world for centuries to come. Hammurabi came to the throne of Babylon around 1792 BCE and ruled for 42 years, dying around 1750 BCE. In that time, he transformed Babylon from a mid-sized regional power into the dominant state of all Mesopotamia, conquering the major cities of the plain in a series of campaigns that moved methodically through the competing powers of the region and left Babylon in effective control of the entire area from the Persian Gulf to the Middle Euphrates. He was a military commander of considerable skill, but he was not remembered primarily for his military achievements. He was remembered for his law code. The Code of Hammurabi is one of the most famous and best preserved legal documents in human history, and its significance goes considerably beyond its historical interest as an artifact of the ancient Near East. It is a systematic collection of legal rulings covering almost every aspect of life in a complex agricultural society: property rights, contracts, marriage and divorce, inheritance, adoption, slavery, wages, professional responsibilities, agricultural obligations, commercial transactions, criminal penalties, organized into nearly 300 clauses that establish principles for the resolution of disputes and the punishment of offenses that reflect a genuine attempt to create a coherent and consistent system of justice. The stele on which the code is inscribed, a basalt column nearly 2.5 meters tall, currently in the Louvre in Paris, shows at its top a carving of Hammurabi standing before the sun god Shamash, the divine patron of justice, in a posture that acknowledges the divine authority behind the laws inscribed below. The prologue to the code explains its purpose in terms that Hammurabi's own voice seems to speak through across nearly 4,000 years. To prevent the strong from oppressing the weak, to ensure that orphans and widows receive justice, to pronounce judgment for all people, and to give them security. The aspiration to justice as the purpose of law, not merely the enforcement of royal will, but the protection of the vulnerable from the powerful, is expressed in terms of genuine moral seriousness. The specific provisions of the code range from the practical to the severe, reflecting the values and the social structure of a society that was simultaneously sophisticated in its commercial and legal thinking and harsh in its punishments for various offenses. The lex talionis, the law of retaliation, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, appears in the Code of Hammurabi several centuries before its appearance in the Hebrew Bible, and in a form that is considerably more nuanced than the phrase suggests. The principle of proportional retribution, that punishment should match the severity of the offense, is a legal principle of genuine moral logic when understood in context, preventing excessive punishment and establishing a floor below which justice cannot descend. The penalties in the code vary by social class in ways that reflect the hierarchical structure of Babylonian society, but the existence of a class-differentiated system of justice, however unjust by modern standards, at least represents a systematic acknowledgement of the relationship between social position and legal obligation. It is important, though, not to imagine Hammurabi as a modern lawgiver in an ancient costume. His code was not a democratic constitution. It did not apply equally to everyone in the modern sense. It assumed hierarchy as a fact of life. It distinguished between free men, dependent people, and enslaved people. It gave different penalties depending on the social rank of the injured person and the offender. It treated the household as a legal structure under male authority. It assumed that slavery was normal, that debt could threaten personal freedom, that corporal punishment was legitimate, and that the king's justice was ultimately inseparable from the king's power. But this is precisely why the code is historically valuable. It shows us Babylonian society not as we might wish it to have been, but as it understood itself to be. The code reveals a world of builders responsible for houses that collapsed, boatmen responsible for cargo, shepherds responsible for flocks, farmers responsible for fields and irrigation, physicians responsible for operations, merchants responsible for loans and deposits, tavern keepers responsible for the behavior of their establishments, husbands and wives bound by contract, children adopted and disinherited, widows protected in certain circumstances and controlled in others. It is not an abstract legal philosophy. It is a portrait of an economy. The famous phrase, an eye for an eye, can mislead modern readers because it sounds purely brutal. In its ancient setting, proportional punishment could also be a restraint. It meant that punishment should not exceed the injury. It placed vengeance within a rule. In a society where family retaliation and private violence could spiral, the king's law claimed the right to measure injury and assign consequence. That does not make the code gentle. It was often harsh, but it was harsh within a structure, and that structure was one of the foundations of state power. The steel itself was part of the message. Law carved into stone does not merely inform. It performs authority. The image of Hammurabi before Shamash says that royal judgment comes from divine order. The long columns of text below say that justice is not hidden in the king's private will but made visible, durable, and public. Whether ordinary people could read the cuneiform signs themselves is another question. Most could not. But the existence of the stele declared that the king ruled according to articulated principles, not merely impulse. There had been earlier law collections in Mesopotamia, including those associated with Namu and Lipid Ishtar. Hammurabi was not inventing the idea of written law out of nothing. What he did was produce the most famous surviving expression of a much older Mesopotamian legal tradition and attach it to Babylon's royal image with extraordinary success. His conquests made Babylon powerful. His law code made Babylon memorable. The code also reveals a great deal about the economic and social life of Babylonian society. The provisions regarding contracts show a commercial world of considerable complexity, with written agreements required for transactions of significant value, penalties for breach of contract, and protections for parties to transactions against fraud and default. The provisions regarding wages and prices, fixing maximum rates for various types of labor and for various professional services, show a state with significant capacity for economic regulation and a genuine interest in maintaining economic order. The provisions regarding medicine are particularly striking. If a physician treats a patient with a metal lancet and the patient dies, the physician's hand is to be cut off. This severe penalty for professional negligence reflects a society that expected professionals to be accountable for their work in ways that the modern concept of malpractice law also expresses. The impact of Hammurabi's code on the legal imagination of the ancient Near East was significant and lasting, though it should not be treated as the first law code or as the direct ancestor of every later legal system. Earlier Sumerian legal collections existed before it, and the relationship between Mesopotamian law, Hebrew law, Greek law, Roman law, and modern legal traditions is complex rather than linear. What Hammurabi's code does give us with extraordinary clarity is the idea of royal justice made visible, a king declaring, in durable public form, that law exists to restrain violence, regulate obligation, and give the weak some protection against the strong. A Babylonian city was not only palaces, temples, and laws. It was also noise, heat, smells, bargaining, family tension, dust, animals, and work. Most of Babylon was built from mud brick because stone was scarce in southern Mesopotamia. Mud brick can create impressive architecture, but it also requires maintenance. Walls erode, roofs sag, floods damage foundations. A city of mud brick is always being repaired, replastered, rebuilt, and built over. This is one reason Mesopotamian cities became tells, artificial mounds created by centuries of habitation layered one generation above another. Private houses were often organized around courtyards. From the street, a house could look plain, almost defensive, with few openings to the outside. Inside, the courtyard brought light, air, work, and family life into the center of the building. Women ground grain, prepared food, managed textiles, cared for children, supervised household slaves, and participated in economic life in ways that appear in contracts, dowry documents, inheritance disputes, and temple records. Men worked as farmers, merchants, scribes, craftsmen, soldiers, priests, boatmen, builders, and officials. Children, especially boys of families that could afford scribal education, learned by copying signs over and over into soft clay until the script became part of the hand. The streets were narrow in many residential quarters. Donkeys and carts moved goods. Water carriers and merchants passed by. Animals lived close to people. Bread was baked. Beer was brewed. Dates were dried. Wool was spun and woven. The city smelled of bitumen, smoke, river mud, animals, sesame oil, fish, sweat, clay, and incense. Babylon's economy depended on the relationship between city and countryside. The city could not eat its own monuments. It needed fields, canals, villages, herds, date groves, laborers, merchants, and administrators. The wealth that passed through its temples and palaces began in the soil and water of the plain. Barley was fundamental. So were dates, sesame, wool, livestock, reeds, fish, and beer. Silver functioned as a standard of value in many transactions, even when payment might be made in kind. Temples and palaces managed large estates, but private enterprise also existed. Merchants formed partnerships, borrowed capital, sent agents, and took risks. Long-distance trade brought in materials southern Mesopotamia lacked: timber from mountains, stone from distant regions, metals from Anatolia, Iran, the Gulf, and beyond. Because Mesopotamia lacked many raw materials, it had to be connected. This is one of the paradoxes of Babylonian greatness. The land was agriculturally rich but materially poor in certain crucial resources. No abundant building stone, limited timber, metals from elsewhere, luxury stones from elsewhere. The city had to organize exchange across distance. Its scribal culture, contracts, seals, weights, measures, and legal norms were not decorative features of civilization. They were tools that made exchange possible. Canals were economic arteries. They carried water, but they also carried goods. Boats moved grain, bricks, reeds, and people. The Euphrates was not simply a river flowing past the city. It was part of the city's internal circulation, a route of supply and communication. When river courses shifted, when canals silted, when maintenance failed, urban life changed. This makes the decline of Babylon easier to understand. A Mesopotamian city was never independent of hydraulic maintenance. Water systems require collective organization, political stability, and labor. A city can survive conquest if its canals are maintained. It can decline in peace if the water system fails slowly enough. The ruin of Babylon was made not only by armies and kings, but by silt, neglect, shifting rivers, changing trade routes, and the gradual movement of people toward places where power and water were better aligned. Contracts mattered because urban life generated constant obligations between people who were not kin. A field could be leased, a house could be sold, a debt could be recorded, a marriage could be documented, a slave could be purchased, a merchant could entrust silver to an agent, a caravan could be financed, a temple could rent land, a family could adopt a child to care for elderly parents and inherit property afterward. These agreements were written on clay tablets, often sealed with cylinder seals, small carved cylinders rolled across the wet clay to leave an image and identify the parties. The cylinder seal is one of the most beautiful small inventions of Mesopotamian civilization. In a single object worn on the body, it combined identity, art, authority, and legal function. A seal might show a worshiper before a deity, a hero mastering animals, a banquet, a contest, a divine symbol. When rolled across clay, the tiny carved world unfolded into a continuous scene. To seal a document was to place the self, the household, or the office into the legal world. This everyday documentary habit is one of the reasons we know so much about Mesopotamia. Egypt gives us tombs, monuments, papyri, and images. Greece gives us literature and inscriptions. Rome gives us law, architecture, and historical narrative. Mesopotamia gives us clay, durable, ordinary, bureaucratic, personal, repetitive, astonishingly abundant clay. A single business archive can preserve the anxieties of a merchant family across generations. A school tablet can preserve the mistakes of a child learning signs nearly 4,000 years ago. A legal tablet can preserve a quarrel over a field, a marriage, a debt, or a slave with a specificity that makes the ancient city suddenly intimate. The Babylon that Hammurabi governed was not simply a legal and administrative center. It was a city of genuine cultural and intellectual achievement in the fullest sense of those terms. The scribal tradition, which maintained the cuneiform writing system and produced the educated administrators and priests who managed the complex institutions of Babylonian society, was also the tradition that preserved and transmitted the literary heritage of Mesopotamian civilization, copying and elaborating the great texts of Sumerian literature alongside the newer Akkadian language productions of the Babylonian scribal culture. The scribal school, the Aduba, was one of the most important institutions in the intellectual life of Mesopotamia. To become a scribe was to enter the world of signs, numbers, lists, and tradition. It required discipline. Students copied simple signs first, then word lists, then proverbs, model contracts, mathematical exercises, hymns, myths, and literary compositions. Education was repetitive because writing itself was difficult. Cuneiform was not an alphabet of a few dozen signs. It was a complex system of signs that could represent syllables, words, sounds, and meanings, inherited from Sumerian and adapted to Akkadian, with layers of history embedded in its complexity. This meant that scribes were not merely clerks. They were guardians of an intellectual tradition that reached backward for centuries. They knew Sumerian long after it had ceased to be spoken as an everyday language, because Sumerian remained the language of scholarship, ritual, and learned prestige. They copied old texts because copying preserved both knowledge and status. They learned mathematics not as a hobby, but as part of the practical skill set required to administer fields, volumes, wages, bricks, canals, loans, and astronomical cycles. The sexagesimal system, base 60, was one of the great tools of Babylonian calculation. 60 is an extraordinarily useful base because it divides cleanly by many numbers: 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This made fractions and measures easier to handle in a world without decimal notation as we use it. The survival of base 60 habits in our minutes, seconds, and degrees is not an accident. It is the long afterlife of Mesopotamian mathematical convenience transmitted through astronomy, Greek science, later Islamic scholarship, and the global systems of measurement that inherited them. Old Babylonian mathematical tablets show procedures that modern readers recognize as solving quadratic problems, calculating areas, working with reciprocals, and handling sophisticated geometric relationships. These were not written as modern algebra, with symbols like x and equals signs. They were procedural. They told the student what to do. Take this number, multiply, subtract, halve, square, combine. But beneath the verbal procedure was real mathematical power. Astronomy developed from a similar combination of practical observation, religious interpretation, and scribal patience. The Babylonians watched the sky because the sky was meaningful. Eclipses, planetary appearances, lunar phases, unusual atmospheric phenomena, and the movements of stars were understood as signs. To read them was to participate in the interpretation of divine messages. Yet the long habit of recording these signs produced data of extraordinary scientific value. Prediction grew out of omen. Mathematics grew out of divination. The desire to know what the gods were saying produced one of the most sustained observational traditions of the ancient world. This is one of the most fascinating features of Babylonian intellectual culture. The categories that modern people separate, science, religion, administration, magic, law, were not separated in the same way. A scribe calculating an eclipse, a priest interpreting an omen, a merchant recording silver, a judge consulting a legal precedent, and a student copying a lexical list were all operating within a world where order could be written, read, measured, and preserved. Babylonian knowledge was practical and sacred at the same time. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the great narrative of the hero king of Uruk and his companion Enkidu, their adventures, and their confrontation with mortality, was assembled into its most complete form during the Old Babylonian period, compiled from earlier Sumerian sources into an Akkadian masterpiece that is still read and still recognized as one of the supreme literary achievements of the ancient world. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not simply an adventure story, though it is that too. It is a meditation on the nature of human existence, on the relationship between friendship and loss, on the inevitability of death and the human desire to transcend it. Gilgamesh, 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, is the most powerful man in the world, the king of Uruk, a hero who can do anything except the one thing he most wants to do: escape his own mortality. The death of his friend Enkidu, whom he loves more than anyone, opens his eyes to the fact that he himself will also die, and the rest of the epic is his desperate, ultimately unsuccessful quest for immortality. The wisdom he is eventually offered by the tavern keeper Siduri on the edge of the world ocean is wisdom that echoes through literature from Ecclesiastes to Omar Khayyam to the Epicurean tradition. When the gods created humanity, they assigned death to humanity but kept immortality for themselves. You, Gilgamesh, let your belly be full, make merry day and night, gaze upon the child who holds your hand, let your wife delight in your embrace, for this is the task of humanity. The Epic of Gilgamesh deserves more than a passing mention because it gives Babylonian civilization an emotional depth that monuments alone cannot provide. A wall can show power. A law code can show order. A mathematical tablet can show intelligence. But Gilgamesh shows fear, grief, friendship, and the human confrontation with death. The story began long before Babylon's greatest political age. Gilgamesh was associated with Uruk, not Babylon, and Sumerian poems about him circulated before the Akkadian versions took shape. But Babylonian scribes preserved, copied, standardized, and transmitted the epic, making it part of the learned heritage that later scholars would discover in broken tablets. Its central movement is painfully simple. Gilgamesh is too strong, too restless, too oppressive. The gods create Enkidu as his counterpart, a wild man who becomes his friend. Their friendship humanizes him. Their adventures glorify him. Then Enkidu dies, and Gilgamesh, who has defeated monsters, cannot defeat grief. He sees in his friend's corpse his own future. He becomes afraid not of an enemy army, but of mortality itself. This is why the epic still works. Its ancient setting is distant, but its emotional structure is not. A powerful person discovers that power has limits. A beloved friend dies. A man who has been praised as almost divine learns that he is human. He goes searching for eternal life and returns with wisdom that is not triumph but acceptance. The flood story within Gilgamesh is also historically important, but it should be described carefully. The Mesopotamian flood tradition existed in multiple forms, including the Atrahasis epic and the Gilgamesh version involving Utnapishtim. The parallels with the Genesis flood narrative are close enough to show that these traditions belong to a shared ancient Near Eastern literary world, though the theological meanings are different. In Mesopotamian versions, the gods may act out of noise, anger, or divine politics. In Genesis, the flood is framed in terms of moral corruption, judgment, covenant, and the sovereignty of one God. Similar narrative material can carry very different theological meaning. This is exactly why Babylon matters for later religious history. It does not mean that later traditions are merely copies of Babylonian ones. That would be simplistic and disrespectful to the creativity of Hebrew, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. It means that the ancient Near East was a world of shared stories, transformed meanings, and deep cultural contact. Babylon was one of the great reservoirs of that world. It is also remarkable that this text, composed in its fullest form in Babylon approximately 3,700 years ago, contains a flood narrative, the story of Utnapishtim and his boat, and the divine decision to destroy humanity and preserve it through one righteous man, that parallels the Noah story of the Hebrew Bible with a closeness that can only reflect direct cultural transmission. The Babylonian flood narrative reaching Hebrew tradition through the extended period of cultural contact between the Mesopotamian and the Levantine worlds. The discovery of this parallel in the 19th century, when cuneiform was finally deciphered and the Gilgamesh tablets were read and understood by modern scholars for the first time, was one of the great intellectual shocks of the age of archaeology. The realization that the flood story of Genesis had a Babylonian predecessor, that the literary heritage of the Hebrew Bible was deeply embedded in the larger tradition of Mesopotamian literary culture. The mathematics of old Babylonian scribes was, by the standards of any period before the development of modern mathematics, of extraordinary sophistication. The Babylonians used a sexagesimal number system, a base 60 system, whose traces survive in our own time in the 60 seconds of a minute, the 60 minutes of an hour, the 360 degrees of a circle, the 6 times 60 seconds in an hour. They developed sophisticated procedures for solving what we would now call quadratic equations, for calculating square roots and cube roots, for solving problems in geometry that required genuine mathematical insight. The clay tablets that record these mathematical procedures, worked examples, often with the answer included, clearly prepared for use in teaching, reveal a scribal culture that understood mathematics as both a practical tool for the administrative and architectural tasks that a complex urban civilization required, and as an intellectual domain worth cultivating for its own systematic development. Babylonian scholarship also included fields that modern readers might classify as medicine, magic, and divination, though those categories overlap in the ancient material in ways that should not be forced apart. A sick person in Babylon might be treated through practical remedies, ritual actions, incantations, diagnosis of symptoms, and interpretation of possible supernatural causes. Illness could be physical, but it could also involve divine displeasure, demonic attack, sorcery, impurity, or an omen that had not been properly addressed. The healer's world was therefore both medical and ritual. Plants, oils, bandages, poultices, prayers, amulets, and spoken formulas could all belong to the same therapeutic environment. To a modern mind, this combination can seem unscientific, but it would be wrong to treat it as simple ignorance. Babylonian medical texts record symptoms with close attention. They preserve recipes and procedures. They distinguish conditions. They organize knowledge. The explanatory framework was different from modern biomedicine, but the act of sustained observation was real. Omens were another major scholarly field. The Mesopotamian world preserved immense collections of omen texts. If this sign is observed, then this outcome may follow. Omens could come from the sky, from dreams, from births, from animal behavior, from oil poured on water, from smoke, from the liver of a sacrificed sheep. Extispicy, divination through the inspection of entrails, especially the liver, was a highly developed technical discipline, and clay models of livers with inscriptions show how carefully the signs were taught. This mattered politically. Kings needed to know whether a campaign should be launched, whether a building project was favored, whether an eclipse threatened the throne, whether a ritual substitution was required to avert danger. Divination was not a private eccentricity. It was part of governance. The king ruled in a world filled with signs, and scholars were trained to read them. The same scribal habits that preserved law and mathematics also preserved these omen traditions. Lists, classifications, precedents, commentaries, and interpretations turned the uncertain world into a readable one. Babylonian intellectual life was built on the conviction that reality had patterns and that trained experts could recognize them. That conviction could produce astronomy. It could produce divination. Often, in Babylon, it produced both at once. The astronomy of Mesopotamia developed over centuries with the patient observation and record-keeping that the Babylonian scribal tradition excelled at, was the most sophisticated in the ancient world before the Greeks, and it was the foundation on which Greek astronomy built. The Babylonian astronomers observed the night sky from their observation platforms with meticulous attention, recording the positions of the planets, the timing of the rising and setting of stars, the cycles of the moon, the occurrence of eclipses. Over many generations, they identified the periodicities of these celestial events with a precision that allowed them to predict future occurrences with considerable accuracy. The Saros cycle, the 18-year period after which eclipses repeat in a regular pattern, was discovered by Babylonian astronomers and used for eclipse prediction centuries before Greek science developed the theoretical framework to explain why the pattern existed. Babylonian astronomy should not be imagined as modern science wearing ancient clothing, but it should also not be dismissed as superstition. It was something more complex, a disciplined observational and mathematical tradition embedded in a religious and divinatory worldview. The astronomer scribes watched the sky because the sky was a text. The gods communicated through celestial order and celestial irregularity. A lunar eclipse, the first appearance of Venus, the path of Jupiter, the color of the moon, halos, conjunctions, and unusual phenomena could all be read as signs. The purpose was not curiosity in the modern scientific sense alone. It was interpretation, prediction, and the management of risk for king, city, and land. But repeated observation changes knowledge. If you record enough lunar eclipses, you begin to recognize cycles. If you watch the planets for generations, you begin to model their behavior. If you keep diaries that include celestial events, weather, river levels, commodity prices, and political happenings, you create an archive of time. The astronomical diaries of Babylon are one of the most remarkable documentary projects of the ancient world because they combine sky, economy, environment, and history into a continuous record. The zodiac emerged from this world of careful sky division and celestial interpretation. The later familiar 12 signs belong to a long development in first millennium Babylonian astronomy and astrology and were then transmitted into Greek and later traditions. The modern horoscope column is a distant and simplified descendant of a much older and more serious attempt to relate heaven and earth. The Babylonians did not develop the same geometric models of planetary spheres that Greek astronomers later favored. Their strength lay in arithmetic schemes, cycles, tables, and prediction based on patterns. Greek astronomy would later absorb Babylonian data and methods into new theoretical frameworks. In that sense, the history of astronomy is not a story of one civilization replacing another, but of knowledge moving, being translated, reorganized, and given new explanations. When we divide the hour into 60 minutes, when astronomers use degrees, when we speak casually of zodiac signs, when we inherit calendars shaped by lunar and solar reckoning, we are not living in Babylon, but we are living in a world whose systems passed through Babylonian hands. The significance of Babylonian astronomy for the subsequent development of Western thought is difficult to overstate. The zodiac, the division of the ecliptic into 12 equal segments, each associated with a constellation and a character, was a Babylonian creation, developed in the first millennium BCE and adopted by the Greeks, and transmitted through Greek astronomy and astrology into the entire subsequent Western tradition. The naming of the planets after the gods, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury in the Roman tradition, which translates directly from the Babylonian divine associations of the same celestial bodies, is another legacy of Babylonian astronomical culture. The 7-day week, as the modern world inherited it, cannot be reduced to a single Babylonian invention. It emerged through a long interaction of Jewish calendrical practice, Babylonian astral symbolism, and later Hellenistic and Roman planetary astrology. But Babylonian astronomy and astrology supplied some of the celestial vocabulary through which later cultures imagined the 7 visible wandering lights of the sky. The precision of Babylonian astronomical observation, recorded on the astronomical diaries that are among the most sustained scientific observation programs in the pre-modern world, provided the data that later astronomers, including Hipparchus and Ptolemy in the Greek tradition, used to develop and test their theoretical models. Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom, also deserves a place in Babylon's story. Marduk was the city's great patron, the god of kingship and cosmic supremacy, but Nabu represented the sacred force of writing itself. His cult center at Borsippa, near Babylon, was closely connected with the Babylonian religious landscape, and during the New Year festival the relationship between Babylon and Borsippa, between Marduk and Nabu, was ritually important. For scribes, Nabu was not an ornament of religion. He was the divine patron of their craft. To write was to participate in a sacred skill. A tablet was a practical object, but writing itself carried divine prestige. This gives Babylonian scholarship a special atmosphere. The scribe is both technician and servant of wisdom, both accountant and inheritor of a sacred tradition. Language also changed around Babylon. Sumerian survived as a learned and liturgical language long after people stopped speaking it in daily life. Akkadian, in Babylonian and Assyrian forms, became the great written language of Mesopotamian civilization. Aramaic, written alphabetically and easier to use for many administrative purposes, became increasingly important in the first millennium BCE and eventually spread widely across the Near East. This linguistic layering is important because it shows that Babylonian culture was not static. It preserved ancient forms while adapting to new practical realities. A Babylonian scholar could live in a world where Sumerian was ancient and prestigious, Akkadian was learned and official, Aramaic was increasingly common, and foreign languages arrived through empire, trade, and exile. The city was a place of translation not only between languages, but between ages. Very old texts were copied in a changing world. New rulers used old formulas. Foreign kings spoke in Babylonian religious language. Exiles heard imperial commands in one language and remembered their homeland in another. This is why Babylon is so powerful as a symbol of language. The Tower of Babel story imagines language being confused and scattered. The historical Babylon was, in a different sense, a place where languages met, overlapped, competed, and survived. It was not the origin of all languages. It was one of the ancient world's great theaters of linguistic memory. At the center of Babylon's religious identity stood Marduk. He was not always supreme in Mesopotamian religion. Earlier Sumerian cities had their own great gods. Enlil at Nippur, Enki at Eridu, Inanna at Uruk, Nana at Uar, and many others. Mesopotamian religion was profoundly local. A city was the city of its god, and the god's temple was not merely a symbolic house, but the god's actual earthly residence. To serve the god was to maintain the cosmic and political order of the city. As Babylon rose, Marduk rose with it. Theology followed power, and power used theology. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, tells how Marduk defeated Tiamat, the personified chaos of the Salt Sea, split her body, and made from it the ordered cosmos. The gods then granted him kingship over them. This was not only a myth about creation, it was a myth about Babylon's place in the world. If Marduk was king among the gods, then Babylon, his city, stood at the center of divine order. The New Year festival, the Akitu, dramatized this theology in ritual form. The festival was not simply a celebration of a calendar date. It was a renewal of kingship, city, cosmos, and divine favor. The statue of Marduk played a central role. The king entered the presence of the god. In one famous ritual element, the king was stripped of royal insignia and struck by the high priest, who pulled his ears and made him confess that he had not sinned against Babylon or neglected the god. Tears were a good sign, evidence of humility before Marduk. Then the royal insignia were returned. Kingship was renewed because it had submitted to divine judgment. This ritual tells us something crucial about Babylonian power. The king was mighty, but he was not autonomous. He ruled by the gods' favor. He built walls and conquered cities, but his legitimacy depended on ritual relationship with Marduk. The city was not merely administered. It was maintained cosmically. The Esagila temple and the Edamananki ziggurat embodied this relationship in architecture. The temple was the god's house. The ziggurat was a staged mountain in a flat land, a human-made elevation connecting earth and sky. Modern readers sometimes imagine ziggurats as towers people climbed to reach the gods. The more accurate idea is subtler. The ziggurat marked a meeting point of levels of reality. It gave architectural form to the idea that the divine realm could touch the human city. The Tower of Babel story in Genesis transforms this image into a critique of human pride. That transformation is itself historically revealing. To Babylonian eyes, the great ziggurat may have proclaimed divine order. To the exiled or conquered imagination, it could proclaim imperial arrogance. The same building can mean different things depending on whether you stand within the city as a participant in its ritual life or outside it, as someone who has suffered from its power. Babylonian society was hierarchical in ways that must be kept visible if the city is not to become too beautiful in the telling. The blue bricks and the mathematical tablets are real. So are slavery, debt, forced labor, gender hierarchy, and royal violence. Enslaved people worked in households, temples, workshops, and fields. Some were born into slavery, some captured in war, some sold because of debt or family desperation. Babylonian law recognized slaves as property, but the legal reality was not always simple. Some enslaved people could conduct business, marry, accumulate resources, and in certain circumstances purchase freedom or be manumitted. This complexity should not soften the fundamental fact. Slavery was a normal and essential part of the social order, and Babylonian civilization, like many ancient civilizations, depended on labor arrangements that modern ethics rightly reject. Debt was another pressure. Agricultural life was vulnerable to crop failure, flood, drought, illness, and political disruption. A bad year could force a family to borrow silver or grain. Interest accumulated. Land, children, or personal freedom could become security for debt. Royal proclamations of debt release, known in Mesopotamian tradition in different forms, show that debt crises could become socially dangerous enough to require intervention from above. The king who claimed to protect the weak had to protect them partly because the economic system could crush them. Women appear throughout Babylonian legal and economic records, though always within a patriarchal structure. Marriage involved contracts, dowries, property arrangements, and obligations between families. A woman's dowry could provide some financial security. Widows could have legal claims. Priestesses and women attached to temple institutions could hold property and participate in economic life. Some women acted in business contexts, but male authority over the household remained powerful, and the legal codes reflect this plainly. The city was not a modern society wearing ancient clothing. It was a world of family strategies, status distinctions, and legal constraints that shaped every life from birth. Labor built Babylon, not only royal genius, not only Nebuchadnezzar's ambition. Tens of thousands of hands made bricks, carried water, moved timber, hauled stone, maintained canals, planted fields, harvested barley, baked bread, brewed beer, wove textiles, copied tablets, guarded gates, and served the temples. Ancient royal inscriptions tend to make kings the agents of all accomplishment. Archaeology and economic records remind us that cities are made by laboring bodies. This matters for the tone of the story. Babylon should inspire awe, but not fantasy. It was magnificent because it concentrated resources on a scale few earlier cities had achieved. The beauty of the Ishtar Gate depended on administration, taxation, skilled craftsmanship, long-distance supply, and political coercion. The same system that produced brilliance also produced burden. That tension is part of what makes Babylon historically interesting rather than merely decorative. Imagine entering Babylon not as a modern tourist looking at ruins, but as a visitor in the 6th century BCE, approaching from the plain after days of travel. At first, the city would appear as a line against the horizon: walls, towers, palms, dust, the faint shimmer of heat, the movement of people and animals on the roads leading toward the gates. As you came closer, the scale would become clearer. Babylon was not a city of stone cliffs and mountain views. Its drama was horizontal, walls stretching across the flatness, canals cutting the land, fields outside the city feeding the population within, the Euphrates binding the urban world to the agricultural one. The approach to the Ishtar Gate would not have been accidental. Ancient cities used movement to produce meaning. You did not simply arrive. You were made to pass through a sequence: outer spaces, defensive walls, gate chambers, processional route, temple precinct, palace district. Each stage changed your relationship to power. The gate towered above you. The animals on the glazed bricks repeated with hypnotic order. The lions of Ishtar moved along the walls with controlled force. The dragon of Marduk, the Meshusu, with its hybrid body, announced that the city's divine patron was present in the architecture itself. Inside the city, the experience would become more human and more crowded. Streets led between high mud brick walls. Doorways opened into houses. Vendors sold food and oil. Donkeys carried loads. Priests moved in ritual contexts. Officials, soldiers, craftsmen, water carriers, scribes, foreign envoys, merchants, laborers, slaves, and children all occupied the same urban organism. Languages mixed: Akkadian in its Babylonian form, Aramaic increasingly important as a spoken and administrative language, the languages of merchants and captives from the west and east. The city was both cosmopolitan and local. It received goods from far away: timber, metals, stone, luxury items, textiles, animals, and people, but it remained rooted in the rhythms of southern Mesopotamia: barley harvests, canal maintenance, temple calendars, lunar months, river levels, and the demands of brick construction. The palace and temple may have projected eternity, but daily life required constant repair. At night, Babylon would not have been dark in the way a modern rural landscape is dark. Lamps burned. Fires glowed. The moon mattered. The stars were watched not romantically, but professionally. Somewhere in the city, trained observers recorded the sky, noting planetary positions, lunar phenomena, weather, market prices, river levels, and political events. The heavens were part of the archive. The city did not only live under the sky, it wrote the sky down. One final point should be kept in view before the city reaches its imperial height. Babylon was always both local and international. It belonged to a particular river landscape, particular gods, particular building materials, and particular seasonal rhythms. Yet it was also tied into networks that reached far beyond the Euphrates. This double identity made it powerful. It could speak the language of local devotion and the language of empire at the same time. A farmer near Babylon, a priest in Sagala, a merchant handling silver, a deported Judean family, a Persian official, a Greek visitor, and a modern archaeologist all encountered different Babylons. None of these Babylons cancels the others. The city is historically rich because it cannot be reduced to one perspective. The physical city of Babylon, at the height of its power in the Neo-Babylonian period under Nebuchadnezzar II, who ruled from approximately 605 to 562 BCE, was among the largest and most impressive cities in the ancient world. a metropolis whose scale and grandeur impressed everyone who visited it, and whose descriptions filled the accounts of ancient writers with superlatives that modern archaeology has substantially confirmed. The city was enormous. The ancient sources give dimensions that, if taken literally, would make Babylon one of the largest pre-modern cities ever built, with walls enclosing an area of perhaps 90 square kilometers. Modern archaeological assessment has somewhat reduced these figures while still confirming a city of very great size. The inner city, enclosed by the main defensive walls, covered approximately 800 hectares, and the outer city, enclosed by an additional line of fortifications and extending into the surrounding agricultural region, was considerably larger. The total population at the city's height is estimated by modern scholars at between 100,000 and 500,000 people, a range that reflects the genuine uncertainty about ancient population estimation, but that confirms a settlement of very great size by any ancient standard. The walls themselves were the feature that most impressed ancient observers. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, perhaps a century after the city's peak, described them as broad enough for a chariot and 4 horses to pass along the top, with 100 gates of bronze. Modern archaeology has confirmed that the main walls of Babylon were indeed of extraordinary width. The outer wall system consisted of multiple parallel walls with a combined width of approximately 25 meters, though the 100 gates are almost certainly an exaggeration that reflects the city's reputation rather than its actual count. The walls were built of mud brick, the characteristic building material of Mesopotamia where stone was scarce, but mud brick reinforced with bitumen and baked brick facing that made them far more durable than simple dried mud would suggest. The material reality of Babylon should not be lost beneath the grandeur of its reputation. This was a city built largely from earth. In Egypt, stone monuments can make the past seem permanent. In Mesopotamia, the basic building material was mud brick, and mud brick is both humble and powerful. It can be made in vast quantities from the river plain itself. It can be shaped, dried, fired, stamped, stacked, plastered, glazed, and arranged into buildings of enormous scale. But it is vulnerable to water, neglect, and time. A Mesopotamian city must constantly remake itself from the same earth on which it stands. Baked brick, bitumen, reed, timber, and mud formed the texture of Babylonian architecture. Bitumen, a natural asphalt found in the region, waterproofed, sealed, bound, and protected. Reeds were used in construction, matting, baskets, boats, and everyday tools. Imported cedar and other woods carried prestige because large timber was not abundant in the southern plain. Glazed brick was a technical and artistic achievement, transforming earth into color, surface, and symbolic force. Nebuchadnezzar's building inscriptions repeatedly emphasized brickwork because brickwork was royal action. He was not ashamed to speak of foundations, walls, baked bricks, bitumen, and labor. Modern readers might find this strangely practical for royal propaganda, but in Babylonian terms it made perfect sense. To build correctly was to serve the gods and stabilize the world. The king who restored a temple foundation was not simply repairing a building. He was renewing the relationship between human order and divine order. A building project in Babylon required more than architectural imagination. It required surveyors, brick makers, haulers, water managers, craftsmen, supervisors, scribes, and accountants. Materials had to be measured. Workers had to be fed. Rations had to be recorded. Bricks had to be counted. Teams had to be organized. A monument is the visible tip of an administrative iceberg. This is why Babylonian monuments and tablets belong together. The Ishtar Gate is not separate from the humble accounting tablet. The gate could exist because the world of accounts existed, because someone measured the materials, assigned the labor, issued the rations, tracked the stores, and recorded the obligations. Bureaucracy is not romantic, but without bureaucracy there is no Babylon. The Ishtar Gate, built by Nebuchadnezzar as the main ceremonial entrance to the inner city and now partially reconstructed in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, is one of the most spectacular works of ancient architecture and ancient art that has survived to the present day. The gate stood approximately 14 meters high and was decorated with brilliant blue glazed bricks, the specific deep lapis lazuli blue that the Babylonians achieved through a combination of copper and cobalt in their glazing process, set with bas-relief figures of three animals: the striding lion of Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, the bull of Adad, the storm god, and the Meshisu, the horned dragon of Marduk, the city's patron deity. The animals alternate in horizontal rows across the gate's facade, their figures executed with a stylized naturalism that is immediately engaging across the enormous distance of time that separates them from us. The gate led into the processional way, the great boulevard that ran through the inner city from the Ishtar Gate to the temple complex of Marduk. The processional way was approximately 20 meters wide, paved with large slabs of white limestone and red breccia arranged in a geometric pattern, and lined on both sides with walls decorated with more glazed brick reliefs. In this case, rows of striding lions, more than 100 of them on each side of the street, advancing in the same direction as the processions that moved along the route during the Great New Year festival. The visual effect of this approach, the gleaming white and gold and blue of the gate, the brilliant lions on the walls, the paved streets stretching ahead toward the great temple complex visible in the distance, must have been overwhelming, a sensory experience calculated to communicate the wealth and the divine favor of the city and its king. The temple complex of Marduk, called Asagila, meaning the house whose head is raised, was the religious and symbolic center of the city, the dwelling place of the great god who was the patron of Babylon and who had been elevated, in the Babylonian theological tradition of the 2nd millennium BCE, to a position of supremacy over the entire Mesopotamian divine assembly. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, recited in its entirety at the New Year festival, described how Marduk had defeated the primordial chaos monster Tiamat, and from her body created the heavens and the earth, establishing his claim to divine kingship over all the gods and all the cosmos. This elevation of Marduk to cosmic supremacy was simultaneously a religious and a political act. The greatness of Marduk was the theological expression of the greatness of Babylon, the divine hierarchy of the cosmos reflecting and legitimizing the political hierarchy of the human world. The ziggurat associated with the Asagila temple complex, the Edamananki, meaning house of the foundation of heaven and earth, was, at its height under Nebuchadnezzar's building program, the tallest structure in Mesopotamia and one of the tallest structures in the ancient world. Modern scholars estimate that the completed ziggurat rose to approximately 90 meters in height, roughly the height of a modern 30-story building, in 7 stages, each smaller than the one below, with a temple sanctuary at the summit housing the statue of Marduk. The ziggurat was not simply a monument, but a functional religious structure, its summit the site of ritual activity that connected the divine realm above to the human realm below, its height expressing in architectural terms the Babylonian concept of the cosmic mountain that connected heaven and earth. The Edamananki was, in all probability, the historical basis for the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. The Babylonian name for the city, Babel in Hebrew, which translates as Gate of God, but which the Hebrew Bible punfully associates with the word Baal, meaning to confuse, and the ziggurat, that was its most visually prominent feature, provided the Jewish exiles who were brought to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar in 597 and 586 BCE with the image that became, in their theological interpretation, the monument to human pride punished by divine displeasure. The story of Babel in Genesis is not primarily about linguistics. It is a theological statement about the proper limits of human ambition, using the greatest city and the greatest building in the world that the biblical writers knew as its exemplar of excessive pride. For much of the first millennium BCE, Babylon existed under the shadow of Assyria, the great northern Mesopotamian empire whose capital cities, Ashur, Kalhu, Dur-Sharrukin, and Nineveh, dominated the Near East with a military and administrative machine of remarkable force. Assyria and Babylon were culturally related, both heirs of the broader Mesopotamian tradition, both using cuneiform, both worshipping many of the same gods, both participating in the same ancient world of omens, royal inscriptions, temples, and scribal learning. But politically they were rivals, and Assyrian control over Babylon was never simple. Assyrian kings wanted Babylon because Babylon mattered. To control Babylon was to claim legitimacy in the southern Mesopotamian world. But Babylon was difficult to control precisely because it mattered. Its priesthoods, its citizens, its ancient prestige, and its religious identity made it resistant to being treated as just another conquered city. Assyrian kings alternated between accommodation and violence. Some presented themselves as respectful restorers of Babylonian temples. Others punished rebellion with devastating severity. The most infamous moment came under Sennacherib, who destroyed Babylon in 689 BCE after repeated revolts. In Mesopotamian terms, this was an act of shocking violence against one of the sacred centers of civilization. His son Esarhaddon reversed the policy and rebuilt the city, presenting himself as the restorer of what his father had destroyed. This sequence, destruction followed by restoration, shows the tension at the heart of Assyrian-Babylonian relations. Assyria could conquer Babylon, but it could not easily live with the consequences of treating Babylon as disposable. The eventual collapse of Assyria at the end of the 7th century BCE opened the way for Babylon's final great political flowering. Nabopolassar, the founder of the Neo-Babylonian dynasty, joined with the Medes and others in the destruction of Assyrian power. Nineveh fell in 612 BCE. The Assyrian Empire, which had seemed terrifyingly permanent, disappeared with a speed that must have stunned the ancient world. Babylon, long overshadowed by Assyria, became the center of a new empire. This background matters because Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was built in the aftermath of Assyrian collapse. It was not merely a wealthy city spending money on decoration. It was a city making a claim. Assyria is gone, and Babylon is the rightful center of the world again. The blue gates, the restored temples, the massive walls, the processional streets, and the royal inscriptions all belong to that claim. Architecture became political memory. Every brick announced that Babylon had returned. Nebuchadnezzar II is the king most responsible for the Babylon that later imagination remembers. Hammurabi made Babylon legally and politically famous in the 2nd millennium BCE. Nebuchadnezzar made it visually unforgettable in the 1st. He inherited the Neo-Babylonian Empire from his father Nabopolassar, who had helped overthrow Assyrian domination and restore Babylonian power. The Assyrian Empire had been terrifyingly efficient in war, administration, deportation, and intimidation. Its fall at the end of the 7th century BCE created a new political world, and Babylon stepped into the space it left. Nebuchadnezzar's reign was long, energetic, militarily active, and architecturally ambitious. He campaigned in the West. He fought Egypt's influence in Syria-Palestine. He conquered Jerusalem. He deported part of its population. And he poured enormous resources into rebuilding Babylon. The Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar was a royal statement in brick. The Ishtar Gate and processional way were not isolated monuments. They were part of a ceremonial landscape. During the Akitu festival, divine statues, priests, the king, and the population participated in a movement through sacred urban space. Architecture shaped emotion. The blue-glazed bricks, the striding lions, the dragons of Marduk, the bulls of Adad, the width of the street, the height of the walls, the controlled approach to the temple district, all of it worked together to make the city feel like the visible center of the world. The inscriptions of Nebuchadnezzar repeatedly emphasize building. He presents himself as the caretaker of temples, restorer of walls, provider for the gods, and protector of Babylon. In Mesopotamian kingship, building was not merely vanity. To build a temple was to serve the god. To restore a wall was to protect the city. To make Babylon splendid was to demonstrate that Marduk had favored the king and that the king had fulfilled his obligations in return. But Nebuchadnezzar's memory is divided. In Babylonian royal ideology, he is the great builder. In biblical memory, he is the destroyer of Jerusalem and the king of exile. Both memories are true to different experiences of the same reign. This is one reason Babylon became such a powerful symbol. It was beautiful from one angle and devastating from another. It was a wonder to those who entered as envoys or subjects of its glory. It was a wound to those who entered as captives. The Jewish exile did not involve the entire population of Judah, and it did not end Jewish life in the land of Judah. The historical reality was complex. But the deportations of elites, craftsmen, officials, priests, and families to Babylonia created a crisis of identity of enormous religious consequence. How could the God of Israel be worshipped away from his temple? Was defeat proof that Babylon's gods were stronger, or was it judgment by Israel's own God? How could covenant, law, memory, and hope survive displacement? The answers developed in exile-shaped Jewish tradition permanently. Babylon became the place where loss produced textual creativity, where memory had to become portable, where scripture and interpretation gained new centrality, where hope for return became a theological force. Later, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam would all inherit something from the questions sharpened in Babylonian exile. But this should be stated carefully, not as though Babylon invented these religions, but as one of the historical pressures under which their ancestral traditions were transformed. The Hanging Gardens require special care because they are the most seductive part of Babylon's legend and also the least secure archaeologically. Ancient Greek and Roman writers described terraces, trees, irrigation devices, and an artificial mountain of green rising in a land of brick and river mud. Later tradition connected the gardens with Nebuchadnezzar and with a Median wife who missed the mountains of her homeland. It is a beautiful story, and it is easy to want it to be true exactly as told. But no surviving Babylonian inscription of Nebuchadnezzar clearly says that he built the Hanging Gardens, and no excavated structure at Babylon has been definitively identified as the wonder. That does not mean the gardens were impossible. Royal gardens were real in the ancient Near East. Irrigation engineering was sophisticated, and Assyrian kings built elaborate landscapes of cultivated luxury. It means only that the evidence is elusive. Some scholars have argued that the famous gardens may have been at Nineveh rather than Babylon, associated with the Assyrian king Sennacherib. Others remain more cautious. A careful script should not present the gardens as a settled fact. For storytelling, this uncertainty is not a weakness. It is part of the fascination. The Hanging Gardens are the missing wonder, the one that survives almost entirely through text, desire, and argument. Whether the ancient descriptions preserve a memory of Babylon, of Nineveh, or of an idealized royal garden transformed by centuries of retelling, the image still tells us something important. Ancient kings wanted to make nature obey architecture. They wanted to lift water upward, make greenery rise above brick, and turn longing into visible power. Even as a question mark, The gardens belong in Babylon's story because Babylon itself is half city and half memory. Whether in Babylon or Nineveh, whether exactly as described or transformed by centuries of retelling, the image of the gardens belongs to the ancient Near Eastern imagination of royal power. A great king did not only conquer. He created abundance. He mastered water. He turned the plain into a cosmos, a palace into a landscape, a city into a wonder. The Babylonian captivity of the Jewish people, the series of deportations that brought large numbers of the population of Judah to Babylon following Nebuchadnezzar's conquest of Jerusalem, was a defining event in the development of the Jewish religious tradition and, through that tradition, in the development of the entire subsequent monotheistic inheritance of the Western world. The experience of exile in Babylon, of maintaining religious and cultural identity in a foreign land far from the temple that had been the center of Israelite worship, forced a profound theological and institutional development in the Jewish tradition. The elaboration of the synagogue as a gathering place for prayer and study that could replace the temple. The increasing importance of the written Torah as a portable sacred text rather than simply a temple document. The development of the theological understanding that the God of Israel was not merely a local deity tied to a specific place, but the God of the entire universe who governed the fate of all nations. The biblical Babylon is not identical with the archaeological Babylon, but neither is it imaginary. It is history transformed by theology. For the people of Judah, Babylon meant defeat, deportation, and the terrifying question of how a covenant community survives when its land, king, city, and temple have been broken. The Babylonian exile was not merely a political event. It was an interpretive crisis. If Jerusalem could fall, what did that mean? If the temple could burn, where was God? If the Davidic king could be removed, what remained of the promise? If the people lived by the waters of Babylon, how could they sing the songs of Zion? The answers were not immediate, and they were not simple. Some exiles assimilated into Babylonian life. Some prospered. Some maintained memory. Some hoped for return. Some texts mourned. Others interpreted defeat as judgment. Others imagined restoration. The Hebrew Bible preserves this range of response: lament, anger, repentance, legal reflection, prophetic hope, apocalyptic imagination, and the deepening of textual identity. The story of the Tower of Babel belongs to a different part of biblical tradition, but it also reflects the symbolic power of Mesopotamian urbanism. A great tower, a city, a single language, a collective human project reaching toward heaven. These become the materials for a story about the limits of human pride and the scattering of peoples. Historically, the great ziggurat of Babylon likely stands behind the image. Theologically, the story is not an architectural report. It is a meditation on ambition, unity, language, and divine boundary. Later, in Revelation, Babylon becomes something broader still, not only the historical city, but the image of oppressive empire itself. Many scholars understand Revelation's Babylon as a coded image of Rome, the imperial city of the author's own world. This is one of the strangest afterlives in history. Babylon, once a real empire that conquered Jerusalem, becomes a symbol through which another empire is criticized. The name travels because it can carry the weight of power, luxury, violence, seduction, and judgment. This symbolic afterlife is part of Babylon's historical importance. Some cities matter because they continue to be inhabited. Babylon matters partly because it continued to be interpreted. The Judaism that developed through and after the Babylonian exile was transformed in ways that would matter for all later Abrahamic traditions. It is too simple to say that Babylon created Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Those traditions have their own long histories, their own texts, their own arguments, and their own later worlds. But the exile sharpened questions that became central to Jewish religious life. how to serve God without a temple, how to preserve identity in displacement, how to make scripture and interpretation portable, how to understand catastrophe without surrendering covenant. Christianity and Islam later inherited a Jewish tradition already marked by those questions. In that indirect but profound sense, Babylon helped shape the religious landscape that much of the world still inhabits. The Persian conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE is one of the most important reminders that great cities do not always fall the way later imagination expects. Babylon's walls were famous. Its defenses were imposing. Its name suggested invincibility. Yet the city passed to Cyrus with comparatively little destruction, and Babylonian sources themselves suggest that the last native king, Nabonidus, had alienated important religious and political constituencies. Nabonidus was an unusual figure. He showed special devotion to the moon god Sin, spent years away from Babylon in the oasis of Tema, and appears to have neglected or disrupted aspects of Babylon's traditional cultic expectations, especially those centered on Marduk. The exact details and the degree of hostility are debated, because some sources are shaped by Persian propaganda after Cyrus's victory. But it is clear that Cyrus presented himself not as a destroyer of Babylon, but as its restorer, chosen by Marduk to correct Nabonidus's failures. This was brilliant imperial politics. Cyrus understood that conquest could be made more durable by respecting local gods, temples, and traditions. The Cyrus Cylinder is not a modern charter of human rights, despite some later romantic interpretations. It is an ancient royal inscription in Mesopotamian style, presenting the conqueror as a legitimate king favored by the local deity. But as a political document, it is extraordinary. It shows the Persian king speaking in Babylonian religious language to win Babylonian legitimacy. Under Persian rule, Babylon did not instantly decline. It remained wealthy, important, and prestigious. Persian kings used it. Administrators worked there. Temples continued. Scholars observed the sky. The city was no longer the independent center of its own empire, but it remained one of the great cities of the Near East. Alexander understood this. After defeating the Persian Empire, he did not treat Babylon as a provincial relic. He entered it as a conqueror who understood symbolic geography. Babylon offered what few cities could offer: ancient prestige, strategic location, administrative depth, and the aura of universal kingship. When Alexander planned future campaigns and imperial organization, Babylon was among the places that could plausibly serve as a center of the world. His death there in 323 BC added another layer to the city's legend. The young king who had conquered from Greece to Egypt to Persia to the edge of India died not in Macedonia, not in Athens, not in Persepolis, but in Babylon. The city that had already absorbed Hammurabi, Nebuchadnezzar, Cyrus, and the exiles of Judah now absorbed Alexander into its memory as well. It became the place where one of history's most restless conquerors stopped moving. Cyrus's conquest also changed the fate of the Jewish exiles. The biblical memory of Cyrus is unusually favorable because Persian policy allowed at least some displaced communities to return and rebuild local cults. The return from exile was not a single simple migration in which everyone immediately went home. Some remained in Babylonia. Some returned in stages. Some communities developed in both places. Babylonian Jewish life would remain important for centuries, eventually becoming the setting in which the Babylonian Talmud was compiled long after the ancient empire itself was gone. This long Jewish presence in Babylonia is one of the deepest continuities hidden beneath the more famous story of exile and return. Babylon was not only a place of trauma, it became a place of diaspora creativity. The community that mourned by the rivers of Babylon also learned how to live, study, argue, remember, and transmit tradition outside the homeland. That ability would become one of the central strengths of Jewish history. So Babylon's role in religious history did not end when Cyrus opened the possibility of return. It continued through the habits of textual study and communal life that exile had intensified. Once again, Babylon is not simple. It is destroyer and teacher, place of loss and place of formation, enemy city and intellectual home. The fall of Babylon to the Persian king Cyrus the Great in 539 BCE was, as already noted in an earlier episode of this series, accomplished without significant military conflict. The gates were opened, the Persian army entered, and a city whose walls had seemed impregnable to ancient observers proved, in the end, to be penetrable not by force but by politics. The Babylonian population, resentful of the last Babylonian king Nabonidus and his religious innovations, received Cyrus with something approaching relief, and Cyrus's famous cylinder inscription, its declaration that he would allow the peoples displaced by the Babylonians to return to their homelands and restore their temples, was a statement of policy carefully designed to win the loyalty of a diverse subject population by presenting itself in terms of each group's own religious tradition. Babylon under Persian rule remained a major city, the second city of the Achaemenid Empire after its administrative capital at Susa, and the Persian kings maintained, and in some respects elaborated, the physical fabric of the city, adding their own palace structures and maintaining the existing temples with the conventional piety toward local deities that characterized Achaemenid religious policy. Cyrus himself and his successors took the title King of Babylon as one of their many royal titles, acknowledging the symbolic importance of this city in the legitimizing vocabulary of Mesopotamian kingship. The city remained central enough to the ancient world's imagination that when Alexander the Great defeated Darius III and took control of the Persian Empire, Babylon was the city to which he returned as the center of his new universal empire. He entered it in triumph in 323 BCE, planning to make it the capital from which he would govern his enormous conquests, a plan that reflected the same understanding that Babylon had always represented in ancient political imagination, that a true universal empire required this city at its center. He died there in June of 323, in a palace of extraordinary splendor, surrounded by his generals, the specific cause of his death still debated by historians 2,500 years later. The Hellenistic period that followed Alexander's death saw Babylon's gradual decline as the city was overshadowed by new Hellenistic capitals, Seleucia on the Tigris, built nearby by the Seleucid successors to Alexander, which drew population and commerce from Babylon as the new political center of the region. The temples continued to function, the astronomical observations continued to be made and recorded, the scribal tradition maintained its ancient practices for several more generations. But the city was shrinking, the great irrigation systems that had sustained its agricultural base being maintained with decreasing effectiveness, the population moving toward the new center at Seleucia. The last dated cuneiform tablet from Babylon comes from 75 CE, the first century of the Common Era, more than 600 years after Cyrus's conquest, more than 1,000 years after Hammurabi's law code. The fact that the Babylonian scribal tradition maintained itself for so long after the political independence of the city had ended is a testament to the depth and resilience of that tradition. The way in which the intellectual and religious practices embedded in the cuneiform writing system continued to be reproduced and transmitted by communities of practitioners even as the political world around them changed beyond recognition. The decline of Babylon after Alexander was gradual. This matters because the end of a city is often less dramatic than the fall of a kingdom. People do not always abandon a place in one catastrophic moment. Trade routes shift. Political favor moves elsewhere. A new capital attracts officials, soldiers, merchants, and craftsmen. Canals receive less maintenance. Temples lose income. Families migrate. Houses collapse and are not rebuilt. Neighborhoods shrink. The name remains famous long after the living city has become smaller than its reputation. Seleucia on the Tigris, founded by Seleucus I, drew population and administrative energy away from Babylon. Later Parthian and Hellenistic political worlds continued to use the region, but Babylon's centrality faded. The scribal tradition persisted astonishingly long, which is one of the most important points. Long after Babylon had ceased to rule, scribes still copied, observed, calculated, and wrote in cuneiform. A script can outlive an empire. A scholarly habit can continue in a shrinking city. The last dated cuneiform texts from the 1st century CE are among the most poignant artifacts in world history. They are not dramatic. They do not announce the end of anything. They simply continue the work, observations, calculations, records. But because we know the tradition was ending, they feel like the last glow of a lamp that had been burning for more than 3,000 years. Modern archaeology recovered Babylon unevenly. Robert Coldway's German excavations at the turn of the 20th century revealed the city's plan with a seriousness earlier treasure hunting had lacked. The discovery and reconstruction of the Ishtar Gate and the processional way gave modern viewers a powerful image of Nebuchadnezzar's city, though that image is also complicated by the fact that so much of the gate is now in Berlin rather than Iraq. Museum reconstruction preserved and displaced Babylon at the same time. The modern site has suffered from excavation, reconstruction, political appropriation, military damage, looting, and neglect. Saddam Hussein's reconstruction project stamped modern bricks with his own name in conscious imitation of Nebuchadnezzar's royal building inscriptions. The symbolism was obvious, a modern ruler claiming continuity with the ancient king. But archaeology was damaged by the project, and later military use of the site after the 2003 invasion of Iraq caused further harm. Babylon is not only ancient history, it is also a modern heritage problem, a place where ruins remain entangled with nationalism, war, tourism, scholarship, and the politics of who has the right to inherit the past. The inscription of Babylon as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2019 recognized not only its physical remains, but its exceptional symbolic power. That distinction matters. Babylon's value is not only what survives in brick. It is the way the city has functioned for more than 2,000 years as a model, warning, myth, parable, and memory. The physical city gradually became the ruined mound, the tell that excavators eventually found when serious archaeological investigation of the site began in the 19th century. Centuries of building and rebuilding on the same location, each generation constructing on the ruins and the rubble of what came before, had created an artificial hill of accumulated habitation that rose above the surrounding plain, the archaeological layers within it representing centuries upon centuries of human activity compressed into a stratigraphy that archaeologists read as geologists read rock formations. The systematic excavation of Babylon was primarily the work of the Deutsche Orientgesellschaft, the German Oriental Society, under the direction of Robert Coldway, who excavated the site from 1899 to 1917 in an archaeological campaign that, despite the limitations of the methods available at the time, produced an enormous quantity of information about the city's layout, its architecture, and its material culture. Coldway's most significant discovery, the identification of the Ishtar Gate and the processional way, with their extraordinary glazed brick decorations, gave the world its most vivid physical sense of what Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon had looked like at its height. The thousands of cuneiform tablets recovered from Babylonian sites, not only through Coldway's excavations, but through generations of both scholarly investigation and, unfortunately, illegal looting, have provided the primary source base for the modern understanding of Babylonian civilization. These tablets, clay records of every aspect of Babylonian life, from royal annals and astronomical observations to temple accounts and private business letters, from literary texts and school exercises to legal contracts and omens and medical prescriptions, are the most complete documentary record of any ancient civilization, providing a depth and a breadth of information about daily life, intellectual culture, religious practice, economic organization, and political history that Egypt or Greece or Rome cannot match in comparable periods. The recovery of Babylon in the modern age was not only an archaeological achievement, it was also a linguistic one. For centuries, cuneiform signs were visible on bricks, tablets, cylinders, and cliff inscriptions, but they could not be read. They looked like decorative wedges, mysterious and mute. The ancient city had left behind an archive beyond imagination, but the archive was locked. The key came through multilingual inscriptions, above all the great inscription at Byzantium in Iran, where Darius the Great had carved a royal text in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. The situation was in some ways comparable to the Rosetta Stone for Egyptian hieroglyphs, the same royal message written in multiple scripts and languages, allowing scholars to move from the known to the unknown. The process was difficult, cumulative, and involved several scholars rather than a single heroic moment. Henry Rawlinson, Edward Hinks, Jules Oppert, and others contributed to the decipherment, working through signs, values, names, grammar, and repeated formulae until the wedges became speech again. The effect was transformative. Before cuneiform was deciphered, Babylon was known primarily through the Bible, Greek and Roman writers, and later legend. After decipherment, Babylon began to speak in its own voice. Kings wrote their building inscriptions. Merchants wrote their contracts. Students made mistakes on school tablets. Astronomers recorded eclipses. Priests copied rituals. Families disputed inheritances. The ancient Near East was no longer a background to other people's texts. It became a documented world in its own right. This changed the relationship between history and scripture in the modern imagination. The discovery of Mesopotamian flood traditions, creation stories, law collections, royal annals, and exile-era documents showed that the Hebrew Bible belonged to a larger ancient Near Eastern world of shared forms and transformed meanings. For some 19th century readers, this was disturbing. For historians, it was illuminating. It did not make biblical texts less important. It made their historical world larger. Every unread tablet remains a small, unopened door. Many tablets are broken. Many are administrative and repetitive. Many require years of training to understand. But even the most ordinary tablet can matter. A receipt for barley can tell us about prices. A school exercise can tell us about education. A legal contract can tell us about family structure. An astronomical diary can fix a date in political history. A tiny fragment can preserve the name of someone otherwise lost forever. In this sense, Babylonian civilization is still being recovered, not in one dramatic excavation, but tablet by tablet, sign by sign, line by line. The decipherment of cuneiform in the mid-19th century, accomplished through the parallel effort of several scholars working on the trilingual inscriptions at Byzantium and on other multilingual texts, in a process that has some parallels to the decipherment of Egyptian hieroglyphs through the Rosetta Stone, opened this enormous archive to modern understanding and fundamentally transformed scholarship on the ancient Near East. The reading of the Gilgamesh tablets in the 1870s and the recognition of the flood narrative parallel to Genesis was one of the intellectual sensations of the Victorian era. The gradual reading and understanding of the astronomical diaries, the mathematical tablets, the legal texts, the literary corpus, This ongoing process of recovery has been one of the great scholarly achievements of the past 2 centuries, and it is still far from complete. Many thousands of Babylonian tablets in museum collections around the world remain unstudied, and the decipherment and analysis of already known texts continues to produce new understanding. The city of Babylon has, in the 2,000 years since it effectively ceased to function as a major urban center, been a powerful presence in human imagination far exceeding its physical remains. The biblical tradition made it the emblem of worldly pride and corruption, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, the city that must fall before the New Jerusalem can descend. The classical tradition made it a symbol of ancient grandeur and mysterious wisdom, the city of the Chaldean astronomers and astrologers whose knowledge of the heavens gave rise to the long Western tradition of associating Babylon with occult learning and esoteric wisdom. The Romantic tradition made it a lost paradise of Eastern luxury and architectural wonder, a symbol of the transience of even the greatest human achievements. Reggae music made it something else entirely, a symbol of oppression, of the Babylon system that the Rastafari tradition associated with Western colonialism and racism, the system that must be overthrown for Jah's people to be free. The phrase Babylon system in this tradition carried the full weight of the biblical Babylon's symbolic resonances while applying them to the contemporary experience of the African diaspora, demonstrating how lived this ancient city remained as a symbol even in cultural contexts very far removed from its original geography and historical moment. The modern nation of Iraq, which occupies the territory of ancient Mesopotamia, has had a complex relationship with its Babylonian inheritance. Under Saddam Hussein, the site of ancient Babylon was subjected to a reconstruction project that used modern bricks stamped with Saddam's name alongside the ancient remains, a project whose archaeological damage was considerable and whose political symbolism was explicit, the modern ruler presenting himself as the inheritor of Nebuchadnezzar's greatness. The Gulf Wars and the subsequent years of instability severely damaged the archaeological sites of Iraq, including Babylon, through a combination of military use of the ancient mound for military installations, looting of the surrounding areas, and the general disruption of the institutional structures, museums, archaeological departments, scholarly communities, that had been responsible for the protection and study of these irreplaceable remains. The ongoing work of archaeologists, historians, and philologists who continue to study Babylonian civilization is recovering, piece by piece, the reality of what this city was and what it meant. The cuneiform tablets continue to be read and published and understood. The archaeological remains continue to be studied and reanalyzed with new techniques. The relationships between Babylonian intellectual culture and the subsequent traditions of the ancient world, Greek, Hebrew, Persian, and through these to the entire subsequent history of Western civilization, continue to be traced and elaborated. Babylon's legacy is not that it invented the modern world by itself. Its legacy is that many lines of later history passed through it. The city preserved one of the most famous legal collections ever carved into stone. It helped transmit sexagesimal habits of calculation that still echo in minutes, hours, and degrees. It preserved and reshaped literary traditions in which the Epic of Gilgamesh could ask, with astonishing directness, what friendship, grief, and death mean for a human life. Its astronomers and astrologers helped provide later cultures with tools for dividing the sky and thinking about planetary motion. Its conquest of Judah created an exile whose religious consequences reached far beyond Mesopotamia. None of these inheritances moved in a straight line. They were translated, resisted, reinterpreted, and transformed. But they moved. It was not the first city, Uruk preceded it. It was not the longest lasting. Rome and Constantinople and a dozen others can claim greater longevity. It was not the largest. The Qin capital of Xianying and later imperial Chinese cities surpassed it in population. But it was, in the specific combination of its intellectual achievements and its historical significance, one of the cities that most profoundly shaped the intellectual and spiritual inheritance of the subsequent world. The Gate of God, the threshold between the human and the divine. A first city in the sense of cultural memory, not literally the first city ever built, but one of the cities through which later civilizations learned to imagine what urban power, law, writing, and divine kingship could mean. The legacy of Babylon is easiest to exaggerate and hardest to state precisely. A careful account has to avoid two mistakes. The first mistake is to treat Babylon as the single source of everything modern. That turns history into a straight line, as though a Babylonian scribe invented an idea and it passed unchanged into our world. Real transmission is rarely like that. Ideas move through conquest, translation, adaptation, misunderstanding, resistance, and reinvention. Babylonian astronomy passed through Greek astronomy. Mesopotamian flood traditions passed through Hebrew scripture with new theological meaning. Legal ideas developed in many ancient societies, not only in Babylon. The 7-day week has multiple roots and later forms. The second mistake is to minimize Babylon because the lines are complicated. Complexity does not erase influence. It makes influence more interesting. Babylon did not create the modern world by itself, but it stood at a crossroads where writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, imperial power, sacred architecture, exile, and textual memory interacted with unusual force. That is enough to make it foundational. A modern person may never have heard Akkadian spoken, never have seen cuneiform except in a museum, never have walked beside the Euphrates, never have heard the name Marduk outside a history book. Yet that person lives in a world structured by writing, documents, contracts, calendars, archives, astronomical habits, inherited scriptures, legal ideals, and urban symbolism. Babylon is not the only ancestor of that world, but it is one of the deepest. This is why the story works for a modern audience. Babylon is remote, but not irrelevant. It asks questions that still matter. What happens when power and knowledge concentrate in cities? How does law restrain violence while also serving hierarchy? How do empires use beauty to justify domination? How do conquered people preserve identity in exile? How does a ruined city become more powerful as a symbol than it was as a political capital? How much of civilization depends on systems so old that we no longer notice them? Babylon is not only a place in ancient Iraq. It is a mirror held up to urban civilization itself. There is a temptation, when telling Babylon's story, to make it the source of everything. The first city, the first law, the first astronomy, the first mathematics, the first literature, the first empire of the mind. That temptation should be resisted. History is more interesting than that. Babylon was not alone. It inherited from Sumer. It learned from Akkad. It competed with Assyria. It was conquered by Persia. It was admired by Greeks. It shaped and was shaped by Jewish tradition. It was remembered by Christians and Muslims. It was excavated by Europeans. It stands today in Iraq, in a modern nation whose relationship to the ancient past is living, wounded, proud, and complex. Its greatness lies not in being first at everything, but in being a place where so many early human inventions converged and became unforgettable. Writing was not merely invented and left behind. In Babylonian culture, it became archive, school, literature, omen, law, mathematics, astronomy, and memory. Law was not merely decreed. It was carved, copied, taught, and imagined as royal justice. The city was not merely built. It was ritualized through processions, gates, temples, and festivals. The sky was not merely watched. It was recorded with a patience that made prediction possible. Conquest was not merely suffered. It was transformed into scripture, theology, lament, and hope. This is why Babylon still matters. Not because modern life is secretly Babylonian in every detail, but because many of the habits that make complex civilization possible were practiced there with extraordinary intensity. Record keeping, legal abstraction, mathematical modeling, astronomical observation, urban symbolism, imperial administration, and the preservation of cultural memory across conquest and decline. The modern world lives by systems so familiar that they feel natural. Calendars, contracts, legal codes, archives, schools, tax records, measurements, standardized time, official documents, sacred texts, city plans, state propaganda, museums, heritage sites. These things did not all begin in Babylon, and they did not travel from Babylon in a single straight line. But Babylon is one of the great places where we can see them early, powerfully, and together. That is enough. A city does not need to be first in every category to be foundational. It only needs to gather enough of the future into one place that later ages cannot stop looking back at it. The flat plain between the two rivers is still there. The Euphrates still runs through it, though its course has shifted over the millennia, and the ancient city no longer sits directly on its bank. The mound that is all that remains of Nebuchadnezzar's great city rises above the surrounding agricultural land, brown and apparently featureless, giving no immediate visual indication of what lies within and beneath it. The Ishtar Gate is in Berlin, its brilliant blue reconstructed from thousands of glazed brick fragments, its lions and bulls and dragons forever advancing across the museum walls in the city that took them half a world away from the land they were made to decorate. But the knowledge that came out of Babylon, the mathematics and the astronomy and the law and the literature, the understanding of the cycles of time and the movements of the stars, and the rights of the vulnerable before the power of the strong. That knowledge is not in Berlin and not in Iraq. It is here, in the structure of the calendar that organizes your day and the legal principles that govern your society and the religious inheritance that shapes your culture whether you are conscious of it or not. Babylon became a first city in memory because so much that came after passed through it, and its influence on the world you inhabit now is deeper and more pervasive than you might ever have imagined. The ziggurat is gone. The hanging gardens, if they existed, are gone. The walls that Herodotus admired are gone. The tablets that recorded the movements of the stars across 1,000 years of patient observation are scattered across the museums of the world, many still unread. But what was made in Babylon endures, in forms so thoroughly absorbed into the civilization you inhabit that they are no longer recognizable as Babylonian, only as the way things are, the structure of the world, the inheritance of everything that came before. That is what a city of this kind can do. It does not create the whole world alone. It gives later worlds materials so deeply absorbed that, after enough centuries, people forget they were inherited at all. Babylon did not give the world its entire shape, but it helped shape some of the frames through which later civilizations measured time, imagined law, read scripture, and looked up at the stars. And so we come to the end of this journey through Babylon. We have walked from the flat plain between the rivers where early urban civilization gathered itself into durable form, through the scribal schools where writing matured from accounting into literature and mathematics became a disciplined craft, to the Great Blue Gate and the processional way and the shadow of the ziggurat. We have sat with Hammurabi's law code and understood something of what a society that believed in justice looks like when it tries to write that belief into stone. We have followed the Jewish exiles into the city and watched their crisis become creative pressure on a religious tradition that would shape the subsequent world. We have watched Cyrus enter Babylon, Alexander die in its palace, and the last scribes make their last tablets in a tradition that stretched back 3,000 years. The knowledge made in Babylon is still in the world. The 60 seconds of a minute, the 360 degrees of the circle, the zodiac above your head, the principle that the strong should not oppress the weak, the flood story that traveled from the Tigris and Euphrates to Jerusalem and from Jerusalem to the rest of the world. Babylon is still here, not as a single source of everything, but as one of the deep layers beneath the structure of the world. Sleep well. Good night.